Welcome to Brandstorm, the podcast that talks to the people behind America's brands. I'm Dan Trzynski, president of Platypus Advertising and Design.
And I'm Nancy Christopher, PR director at Platypus. What's the secret to a really great radio campaign? If anyone knows, it's today's guest. Please welcome Dan Price, president, owner, and partner at Oink Ink Radio, the oldest and largest radio ad agency in the U.S. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
That's a great name. Is there a story behind Oink Ink?
Pretty good.
Obviously, there's got to be.
As you can imagine, we sort of get that all the time. To be honest, I wish the story were funnier than it was for us at the time when we came up with the name. Formerly, I worked for a New York-based production company and then went on to leave there and went to work for an LA-based one. The two of them became embroiled in a legal battle over my switching, which resulted in my deciding, you know what, I think I'm just going to go out on my own. And the name I had come up with originally was Ham Radio, which is sort of a ironic double meaning play on words thing. But remember, this was before the, internet, and our fictitious name search yielded no hits. And lo and behold, there was an entity with that name doing what I intended to do, and doing it in New York City, of all places. And meanwhile, I had spent, what little money I had on these materials to support Ham Radio. I had the artwork, the logo, these promotional rubber pig noses. And so my new name needed to be pig-related.
Hence, Oink Ink Radio. That's great. Now, you've written, directed, and produced some of the most successful radio campaigns ever. And you've earned more than 1,000 national and international radio awards. What are some of your favorites?
Well, that's hard to say because we've done so many, as you say. And I find, though, that as I get older, favorite means something different to me than it once did. Back in the day, it probably meant, the most highly awarded. But I find that they sort of represent now certain thresholds and, I guess, memorable times during Oink's lifetime. So early on, we did a really cool campaign for Texaco Star Mart and their agency Bates in Houston. We'd done a lot of Southwest Airline Want to Get Away
those are great
work. That was, real fun. We've had one client, CBS Television Distribution, which at first was King World. And we've had them for over 20 years. It might even be 22 years now, producing spots for both Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. And those are always a blast because they're a great client that likes to sort of push the envelope. And then I would say maybe, present day, we enjoy a great relationship with the folks at Staples. And that work represents a sort of different challenge than had some of these other campaigns I mentioned, because, retail historically needs to work a bit harder. And so
Absolutely.
We're constantly being challenged to keep, that work fresh and effective and still engaging.
And it doesn't get any more commodity than office supplies, right? So,
right.
and so to stand out in that, I think it's incredible at what you do.
Thanks. Yeah, it is a challenge.
So in the early days, Oink Radio made radio ads for agencies, and now you call yourselves a radio-only ad agency. What changed for you? And do you still do work for agencies?
Yeah, we've been through a few iterations. I think it's important when you have a small business, in any field, to stay, I guess, nimble. And we began all those years ago servicing ad agencies, as you say, because they were interested in kind of plussing their radio. They might have wanted help punching up scripts or casting or directing actors. And then we went through a stage during which we did tons of radio for broadcast TV, like, Fox and TBS, CNN, Disney, and on and on. And eventually, and bringing us to present day, we felt like we had a lot of value to provide to brands directly. And so we became, a full service radio agency, sort of soup to nuts. And we like that because we're able to kind of dig in and solve problems far earlier in the process than we once did when we worked for agencies. And so advertisers, I think, seem to appreciate the passion and kind of expertise we bring that sometimes they're not getting from their agencies, who sort of land on and gravitate toward the sexier, Super Bowl TV spots and things like that,
What about style, Dan? Has that changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest change for me, I guess, in style would be that we see far less what I would call ensemble records nowadays. I mean, today radio's having to work really hard. There's just so many other demands on one's dedicated audio listening time. And so brands, they want to see results and they feel as though the best way to achieve that is to sell and sell hard. But a couple decades ago, we were encouraged, I guess, to reward the listener for the time she just gave us. And so spots were more freewheeling. Humor was a big thing. And so we'd see the same groups of actors come in every day as ensembles and read for the family around the dinner table or the conference room meeting or meeting the dad while picking up the daughter for a first date, that kind of stuff. And we just don't really get calls for that style nearly as much anymore.
Do you miss that?
Yeah, it's fun. It's two different kind of challenges. I mean, those were great and friendly and real spontaneous. But nowadays, the challenge is how do you solve the brand's problem, but do it in a creative way so that you still are able to stand out, even though you might be doing what some consider like straighter work. And I think the secret there is to kind of be clever in doing that in order to stand out more than the competitors might be.
So your company not only keeps up with new technology, you are kind of doing some very innovative things. Can you give us some examples of how you're using technology in audio advertising?
Yeah, I think some of the sexier things we're developing now involve short form and dynamic audio for streaming. Shorter form, which I love, just sort of forces us to get simple, like, 5 to 15 seconds simple. And dynamic, more of a platform thing than an attack thing like a short form might be, is, if you're not familiar, because it's awfully new, not many people are.
No, explain it, because I saw it on your website and it's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah, it's I guess how I would classify it is it's the real time compilation of an audio spot on the fly and automatically, and it's all dictated by data points. So, weather, time of day, day of week. I mean, they can get as deep as, pollen count in a given area where that might matter. But more practically, we can become more and more targeted in messaging depending on who's listening, on what device and the activities they're participating in, the music they enjoy. So this data all comes together by selecting pieces of the recorded content and assembling it instantly to create this custom spot. And so it's really a great way to become relevant in a manner that traditional radio just never really could, in that sort of depth.
So in the production of that, you've got to produce
50 different spots.
I was trying to figure that out when I was doing the little example. It's like, my God, how many different ways do you have to cut this thing?
Well, yeah, it depends on, of course, what the data point is.
Yeah, if you've got 4 or 5 data points,
obviously.
I mean, it's...
Yeah, I love the one...
I never do math on the radio or on a podcast.
Well, I love the one... The example
is
advanced auto parts, where you tell them it's a Monday and
I like
it's
country
raining
music
out.
Yeah.
I like dance music, whatever.
And literally, the number of variations of that is you take each of those data points and just continue multiplying them, first to the second, to the third, to the fourth. And you'll end up in a lot of cases with as many as 15,000 potential
combinations.
Combinations. And so half of them may never see the light of day, but they're all there ready for that combination that come together.
Does that cost a fortune?
It's mostly just production time to record all of that, bucket it properly.
Right.
And, it's still so new that there's not even like an official union rate for that. We're sort of working with them.
No kidding.
Yeah, we're sort of working with them and just sort of feeling our way to see, because you couldn't possibly pay somebody
for 15,000 different
residuals
spots. Right.
Exactly. Right. And they understand that. It's just that, it takes a different way of thinking about it.
So is digital, and this short form, the dynamic radio, is that killing traditional radio? Has your business suffered because of that, or what?
Well, I will say, if we've been pretty good at anything over the years, it's, I guess, our ability or willingness to remain nimble. Every few years, my partner / brother Jim and I regroup and we make adjustments or not to our business model. And several years back, we decided to stay out ahead of all this, great new technology and new audio platforms. And we figured, let the Silicon Valley guys develop all these cool new tools. We'll be ready to run with them and be the first to not just use them, but do good work with them.
Right.
And so right now, I'd say is the most exciting time we've ever experienced, really. Not only are there the streaming opportunities I mentioned, but there's podcasting, sonic branding, and things to develop still, like, voice command and in-car and things like that. And so I don't think I would say that it's killing traditional radio, but I think it's more an opportunity for traditional stations themselves to enhance their current offering. I just think eventually what we call radio will be consumed differently.
Yeah, I think it already is. But I really think the power of audio will withstand the test of time. I mean, even look at what Amazon's doing with Audible. Listening, I love their line, listening's the new reading.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's always going to be part of consuming content.
Okay, so let's talk about the elements of a great radio spot. What do you think they are?
I guess what we've found is that every great radio spot, in my estimation, there are probably other things, but they all need to have, I would say, 4 elements to be most effective. I think number one, right from the outset of your spot, you need to gain the attention of the listener. I mean, he or she didn't tune in to the radio to hear your spot. They're conditioned, in fact, to tune out a commercial. I mean, they may start to give thought to other things as a commercial break begins, or start up a conversation, or maybe even switch the dial. But our job is to say, sonically anyway, hey, stop what you're doing. We're about to tell you something that you'll want to hear. And that can be achieved with a jarring sound, but it could even be just a subtle nuance or a unique cadence delivered by the voice actor. But no matter what, it has to disrupt in some way. And then number 2, I would say, we want to tell a relatable story to engage the listener. Again, listeners are at best reluctantly paying attention. And so we want to give them a reason to stick with us. And if they can relate to the story we're telling, they'll likely find it more interesting. Then, like all great but basic and obvious advertising goals, is to make sure the established problem featured in our story is solved by the product or service that we're promoting. But then lastly, and this is the one I think people forget to do most often, is we want to reward the listener for the time he or she just gave us. This is, as I say, one of the most forgotten elements today in our field, I think, because the listener's not listening to hear what you have to say. You need to, in a creative way, thank them for their time. And that's why so often, we've landed on humor over the years. But if not humorous, something clever, whatever, it just has to be something in the form of a reward. Because otherwise, they won't likely give you, a listen the second time, let alone the 7th.
Right. So how important is talent? You didn't mention that in your list, because my theory always is I hear a tremendous amount of good ideas on radio spots, but they're dramatically underproduced.
Yeah.
Because they're just using the local radio talent, or
right.
And I say that with love to any radio talent that's out there listening.
I mean, the 4 points I bring up mostly have to do with writing. When you sit down to conceive of a spot, and you really shouldn't say, let's go produce this until those 4 things are achieved. But yeah, one of the other elements that I think is, incredibly important is talent, because, good interpretation done by someone who voice acts for a living can, I think, salvage even the most mediocre script. But a bad or uninspired or undynamic performance can ruin even the best written copy.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately for brands, good radio, I believe, isn't often cheaper radio. But a little extra money can make all the difference in the world, which may not be true of other disciplines. Almost nothing you would do in the TV space can be plussed with just a little money. But using a professional voiceover in a radio commercial will really make a huge difference, and shouldn't cost you that much more than whatever it is you're paying to the non-great voiceover.
Right. I love the term voice actor, because I really think the good spots you hear on TV or on radio, you can tell it's a good actor. It's a good performance,
Yeah.
not just somebody reading a script or faking an Italian accent, or I mean, it's just I just hear so much of that and
Well,
go,
sometimes that's funny.
yeah, but it's not.
Yeah. Often, though, it's not intended to be funny.
Right,
That's when it's really
right.
not funny. Yeah.
So, Dan, you did bring some radio spots that you've created that demonstrate some of the elements that you just talked about. The first one is for NBC. It's called Guys with Kids. Let's take a listen, and then hopefully you can tell us what you think makes this spot great.
Once upon a time, there were 3 bears. And Red Riding Hood said, Grandma, what bad breath you have.
And the mama bear said, who left the seat up? And the papa bear said, not everybody needs it down.
I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll take a chainsaw to that door.
Because sometimes ugly ducks just stay ugly. They all lived, for a while.
When Dad's in charge, it's a whole new story. Guys with Kids, a new NBC comedy from Jimmy Fallon.
Does this belong to you? I found him behind the bar.
Guys with Kids premieres tonight at 8:30 on NBC.
Well, I think, gaining attention from the outset by the use of the familiar phrase, once upon a time, would check the first box in my list of musts that I sort of reviewed earlier. I mean, we start with the iconic phrase at the beginning of the story we're telling, and that's sort of a hard one not to pay attention to. I think then we accomplish the being relevant element as well for those who, have kids and
Absolutely.
are familiar with these well-known fairy tales, which was the target market, of course, for that show.
Families with kids.
And I like, too, I think the twist in that you're not entirely certain where this is going, but then there's an aha moment when it's explained that, these kids were greatly influenced by their fathers.
Right.
Hence, Guys with Kids.
Right. Right.
So the next one's Southwest Airlines. It's called Interview.
Would Miss Maya Connection please report to baggage claim? Miss Maya Connection.
Carry your own bag. Please meet your party at Gate B. Carry your own bag to Gate B.
Attention passengers, been delayed, and will you bump me? Been delayed and will you bump me? Please report to the terminal.
Traveling can be hard.
Attention, all of our flights are full. Would all of our flights are full, please report to the ticket counter.
But Southwest Airlines is making it easier with online check-in and self-serve kiosks.
Avery seat is full. Attention passenger, Avery seat is full.
Wilma luggage show up. Wilma luggage show up to Carousel 3.
And now Southwest flies out of Chicago's Midway Airport. It's just minutes from downtown and has convenient parking. So even
Ivana sleeping late
can still make her flight in time. Make traveling easy and book your next flight out of Midway at southwest.com.
You are now free to move about the country.
That's funny.
So again, in that we're banking on the situation being familiar, in that we've all been on a job interview, or at least found ourselves in situations that didn't go entirely as planned and not in a good way.
Right.
So this again employs the left turn technique at the end as you find yourself wondering, what's going on here. But I think it also demonstrates the use of a concept which came from the problem being solved. So many times I hear concepts which have no connective tissue to the product or solution. They're just sort of being funny for the sake of it or whatever. And so I don't believe a listener can be expected to make that connection later, let alone in 7 weeks from now when eventually I might need that product or service, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I love about that spot is, again, when getting back to acting, the guy who had arguably the fewest lines in the spot, but his delivery makes that spot, the deadpan, just dry.
His performance in that is just the one little noise he makes. I always just like the,
Yeah,
it's just like, was this special?
Now, is that written in the script, that noise, or did that just happen while you were?
I don't really remember, to be honest with you. I'd like to say it was written, but it may have been just to break her up, or maybe there was something there.
Sure.
But he certainly could have done that on his own, because we encourage quite a bit of that spontaneity in the sessions.
But does that kind of mess up the timing if you haven't kind of thought that out?
Yeah, but sometimes you just get gold out of that.
I know, but it still has to be that 30 seconds. Or...
Right. Well, we are pretty strict when it comes to writing, that everything we write is rather on the short side. All of that is worked out before we walk into the studio, so we're not spending the hour and a half we have with an actor doing anything other than getting great performance, getting a lot of inventory. Because if we're spending, and I've seen it happen, the first 40 minutes trying to make a 38-second spot into 30, all of that time is just a complete
God, I've
waste
never
of time.
done that.
No, I mean, all of that is worked out down to the half a second, to be honest with you, so we know going in what we're up against.
Very cool. So this last ad is called Traffic, and it's for the game show Jeopardy!
At the end of the day, everybody wants to be home for Jeopardy!
Very clever. How did you get all those sounds? How did you work that out?
Yeah, we sampled them. We worked with an arranger for that spot and sampled a bunch of car horns and then played them in, specific pitches to sort of accomplish all of that. That's a pretty old spot, but it still works today.
Oh, yeah,
it
holds
will work
up
forever as long as that show's on. But what I think I like about that spot is it couldn't get any simpler. There's this one little message. It's radio that uses the medium for, what it was intended to do and be, I think. We like to treat it, radio as not a flyer you leave under someone's windshield wiper while they run into the mall, but an opportunity to use sound in a creative way. Because after all, your listener's imagination is, far more powerful than whatever it is we could write. And so we like to, remain simple, often achieved, as I said, by writing short and let the listener kind of fill in the blanks in their imagination. It's just far more vivid that way.
And what's more recognizable than Jeopardy!
Right. You certainly couldn't do that with, many.
I'd love to hear or see the TV version of that with a traffic cop, being like the conductor of, pointing to the different cars and just swinging.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Dan, on a local level at least, it's really difficult to get clients to really spend money for radio ads anymore. They will spend it on the media buy, but not for the creation of the ad. You come from New York and deal with big brands, companies,
yeah.
How would you deal with that?
Boy, that is a great question, because I wasn't always in New York, and I remember working in Wilmington, Delaware, and even on that level, we were always, I was at a radio station. We were always looking for ways to still, with very little resources, make spots as good as humanly possible, because, as you say, no matter what the media budget, it's always significant to the advertiser, and it always is mind-blowing to me that they would rather, maybe spend, say, 5% rather than 15% of their media budget on the production and creation of a spot, because that, to me, creative is everything. I mean, you could listen to the radio for 4 days and not hear a good one, a good radio commercial in that time. I mean, the observation is sort of proven out by just, all you have to do is do that. And it's just really is surprising to me that you don't see a bigger commitment. And as you say, we've been lucky. Our clients are and have always been larger brands. And even though sometimes you're fighting a budget fight and things like that, we've historically been retained by those brands who take spending all those media dollars seriously. They could easily mail it in, but they believe that it's worth spending a bit more on the front end if you're going to be spending quite a lot of it on media on the back end.
That's great advice.
So if you had a crystal ball, what's next in audio advertising?
Wow, this is probably the toughest time that I ever remember to have to answer a question like that, because there's so much going on and you just don't know what's going to shake loose. It seems every few days there's some new platform, and there are these new technologies now that haven't even really played out yet. And so but I think audio is for sure here to stay. It might be argued it's the hottest method at the moment. And as far as I can tell, it should remain it'll remain the most intimate medium there is. It's one-on-one, it's personal, and that's really, really powerful. So with a crystal ball, I might suggest that interactive voice command in the connected home holds the most excitement for us. I mean, imagine where all of this will be in just, 5, 10, or 25 years. I can't even get my head around that. But just maybe, thinking half pepperoni, half mushroom, and your pizza will arrive 15 minutes later by a driverless car and will be paid for with whatever replaces Venmo, is what the next thing will be. And all that's soon, so I can't even imagine what it'll be like in 25 years from now.
Didn't I just see that for a pizza ad where your pizza just comes
Well,
in a driverless car?
It's pretty close to that already.
You can save your favorite in the Pizza Hut app and just tell Alexa, order me a pizza, and literally just say that, and it just shows up.
Wow.
And it's all, it takes a little bit of setting up to get it to that point.
Right.
But yeah, you could go through all that. And then from that point on, it's as simple as asking for it.
Do you do work for Pizza Hut?
I think we probably had at some point in the past.
Well, I brought that up because I just thought it was funny that weekend for Super Bowl Sunday, they changed their name just for that weekend to Pizza Hut Hut. I thought that was kind of clever.
I didn't hear that
great.
one.
It's pretty good.
No, I didn't either. That's great.
So anyways, for those who still want to make great radio ads, what's the best way to connect with you, Dan?
I guess either calling us. Our number's 212-334-5800, or emailing Danielle Malizia, who handles business development for us, and her email address is daniellem@oinkradio.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. This has been great.
Really great time with you.
Thanks for having me. It was really great to be a part of this. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you have any comments about today's shows or any questions for us, please feel free to reach out to Dan or me on our LinkedIn pages. Your support helps us grow, so we'd love for you to take a minute to share, review, and subscribe to Brandstorm.
This is Dan Trzynski along with Nancy Christopher at Platypus Advertising and Design, an awesome company that creates perceptions that influence choice. Join us next week for another episode of Brandstorm.